Welcome to RealCast, the weekly roundup of the real asset markets. My name is Richard Betts and I'm joined by Judi Seebus, Antonio Gill and Leanne Tritton, and we'll also have a special focus on student housing. But let's start with the roundup of the week. Judi, what have you been following this week?
Swedish developer Skanska, which is one of the biggest office developers in Central and Eastern Europe, that they've unveiled plans for the first climate neutral office project in that region. They're going to build climate neutral office in central Prague, and the construction's due to start in 2023. I think it's really interesting because CE has been a little bit behind the rest of Western Europe, but Skanska has made a commitment, a global commitment. It's targeting net zero carbon emissions by 2045, and we're seeing more companies, focus more on sustainability and carbon neutral. Bouwenvest, the big residential investor in the Netherlands, has got a similar target to Skanska. Redevco, high street retail specialist, has also got a similar target. So I think that's a real trend, and it's despite COVID, despite pandemic, sustainability is still very much on the agenda.
Leanne, what have you been picking up this week?
Of course, we've just come from the Prime Minister's press conference this morning, and the key thing for people in the property industry is all about his guidance around back to work and also use of public transport. Now, in terms of back to work, it's pretty much been booted back to the employer to say, if you can make your place safe, you can go back to work. So I'm not sure it's as strong guidance as people in the property industry wanted, but I think it's a good start. I think some of the messaging around back to the office is slightly skewed. It's not really about back to the office, it's back to the city. It's using galleries, museums, being part of city life again. And it's been very positive this week, particularly. We've seen a lot of people starting to come very slowly out of this hibernation. And I think playing into that, Property Week today reported that JLL are about to do a deal with British Land on number 1 Broadgate, and that will be their headquarters for all of their offices. So I think that's really interesting and a vote of confidence really in the office going forward. We've got Paris Real Estate Week in September. We've got 2 massive big hitters in Nicolas Sarkozy, ex-president of France, and Steve Wozniak, one of the co-founders of Apple, who are giving keynotes there. And they're very keen to get back. And again, I think that has a big impact right across the sector. And Bishopsgate Goods, which is a major site in Shoreditch, Ballymore and Hammerson, have had plans on that developing over the last decade, really. And that finally has a date for review and a decision in November. So I think a positive decision on that's going to be a great boost for lots of people in the London economy.
Antonio, obviously based there in Iberia, what have you been picking up on from the market there?
The theme of COVID, of course, dominate our days. These few last days, Portuguese people is a little bit in anger with the British government because of a very difficult decision to understand restraint of tourists, of UK tourists, to come to Portugal. And of course, for Portugal and Spain, tourism is very highly impacting the whole economy and of course real estate, because many of the assets and many of the investments, even international investments, are related with the leisure industry. In Iberia, we are trying to return to the possible normality. I believe the numbers and figures are quite now reasonable and should let us come back to our work and to regain our lives. We need to understand that we are living a new reality, and masks is part of our lives and social distancing is part of our lives, but yet regaining our lives. And I really believe that this is happening, and we are tracking deals in Iberian Property, and we still record deals, and a very reasonable number of them. For instance, in 2 weeks' time, we have already recorded 7 deals. So it's almost 1 deal in every 2 days.
There does seem to now be a bit more of a focus on actually what people are doing, and picking up on some of the things that actually we've been discussing. I noticed in Property Week that there was a story that half of local authorities lack policies for senior housing. This was research from Knight Frank and Owen Mitchell, highlighting again that growing gap in terms of provision in the sector that we discussed recently also with Ron van Bluis. And that was something that he highlighted also in the Dutch market. I wanted to pick up as well on student housing, because we had new research from Sami Vertracker at BONARD just showing that the fundamentals are still in place, that international students want to resume or start their studies, but the problem isn't actually lack of demand for this, but more to do actually with difficulties traveling, visa restrictions, and particularly that affects the US. And so from a global perspective, there's a view that this may shift destinations towards Canada and Europe as the biggest winners out of this, which was quite an interesting pick, I think. And there seemed to be quite a positivity. Lambros Repas of Core Estate highlighted that for their properties, they usually have 98% occupancy rates, which has gone down to 94%. And so not actually seeing the kind of impact that was expected, but also highlighting that Poland was an area, because affordability actually was still one of the key things, and that Poland was being seen as particularly as a good place to invest across the board, both in terms of student housing and co-living. And we mentioned last week GSA, Global Student Accommodation, and Rob Waterhouse, their head of transactions, he highlighted one of the trends that people were very fearful about, I think, in the market, which was, for the UK, they believe that decline in the number of Chinese students will be offset by an increase in domestic students. And so the market should prove resilient. And I think that's quite interesting, just in terms of how that discussion has moved on and changed over the last sort of month or so, really. And it'll be interesting to see how that changes as well once we get to September and universities actually start going back.
I think what we're seeing in the student accommodation market is that student populations are still growing, and there's a lack of supply. And I think, this week a lot of media reported that the two prominent student accommodation industry leaders have set up their first ever lending vehicle dedicated solely to the student resi sector. The name of the company is Kinetic Capital. And they've already launched their first debt vehicle with an initial 110 million euros of financing. The focus will be on the UK and Ireland, which fits in with the background of the two founders, who are Nick Porter and Stephen Grant. I think it's really interesting that they've made this leap towards financing, which has not been done before in this industry. So I think it's a real sign that the sector has come of age.
The whole issue about student housing, I think, throws up what you were talking about, aged care as well. And I think that one of the positives about COVID is, for many years, people have talked about flexibility in asset class and, long life, loose fit, all of these sorts of things, but have never been really able to get their head around why there would be this dramatic change. I think there's going to be a lot of change, I think, in the student market. I think we can't underestimate that.
Student housing is really booming here in Portugal and Spain. Portugal and Spain are, of course, well-qualified places to attract students, and a lot of money is being placed developing these new schemes, and again, on student housing and for universities, reinforces what I was first saying. We need to recover our lives.
Thanks very much, Antonio. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Leanne. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week for our roundup of the key themes in real assets, and we'll take a special look at operational real estate.